that Federal Reserve System is going to be 100 years old. So what we should do is have a bill that repeals the Federal Reserve Act on its 100th year. Wonderful idea. The Federal Reserve has to be challenged for economic reasons, for moral reasons, as well as constitutional reasons, and also because it causes governments to grow. But the moral reason is very simple. They're the counterfeiters. They counterfeit money. Now, the founders didn't like counterfeiters. They wanted us to have only gold and silver as legal tender, and then they had a Coinage Act of 1792, and they said anybody who counterfeits the currency would get the death penalty. That's how serious they thought it was and how important that was. But they're the counterfeiters. They devalued the currency, and yet they have up until recently been held in very high esteem. But the truth is they create the bubbles, and then that sets the stage for the inevitable bust and the recessions and the depression, and then they delay the recovery, and this is what we're going through right now. But economically, it's a major problem for the business cycle. But also constitutionally, there's no authority for a central bank. It's not there. And this argument's been going on a long time. Jefferson and Hamilton had the argument. And that would go back and forth. First Hamilton wins, and then Jefferson became president. He got rid of the national bank. It's been going on. It would be neat to have another president one day that got rid of this Federal Reserve. Yeah! The issue indeed is liberty. It means also that the opposite of liberty is big government. The bigger the government is less liberty. It's just automatic that way. So if you think you can have big government and a lot of liberty, it's not the case. But the Federal Reserve enhances the growth of government. So if it's an entitlement system, there's never enough taxes and never enough borrowing, so you have to print the money, and that delays the consequences, and it hides the people who suffer the most. It hides the victims. So it's very tempting. The politicians love it, and they get away with it until there's a major crisis, and we're in the midst of that, and that's why things will have to change. But also the issue of war. Wars cannot be fought without inflation, and that is the printing of money. So if we truly wanted to change our policies, we should do one thing that, even if you can't get all the tax code changed and all the laws changed, you could do one thing to make the point. Get rid of the withholding tax. Now, this is what would happen. If the businessman wasn't required to withhold your tax, he then becomes a tax collector, and of course you then have to participate, and if there's ever a challenge, you're guilty until you're proven innocent. It's totally unconstitutional the way it operates. But what if we as a people had to write a check every month to pay all the bills? We couldn't borrow the money, we couldn't print the money, and paid for the type of government we get. I think that it wouldn't last very long. I think people would rebel and say, I'm not sending you any more money for what I'm not getting from the government. But the politicians' deception is overly tempting, and they yield to the temptation to spend the money. And you have to admit that for a long time it sort of worked for the favor of the politician, because they can go and promise whatever they want, and they can borrow the money, and we were so wealthy, and we were able to do it for a long time. But things are changed now. The wealth is gone. The control now is on special interests. We don't endorse the principle of liberty and earning and allowed to keep what you earn. What we have endorsed is that the government's responsible for redistribution of wealth and to manage our lives and manage the world. And that is exactly opposite of what a free society is all about. But if we continue to do this, the country will go totally bankrupt. It's technically bankrupt right now, but it will go bankrupt, and that's when you'll see the destruction of the currency. But we're approaching that rather quickly. And if we continue to do this, we'll see more and more power. The argument in Washington, the argument in the campaigns, isn't so much liberty versus big government. Unfortunately, My goal, of course, is to take the position that it should be the contest between liberty and big government. That's what the campaigns are about. It's a fight over the special interests of one party versus the special interests of the other party, and they're clawing away at a pie that is shrinking. And that's why people are getting very, very nervous, and that's why you should be very concerned, because this is not going to last. I used to talk a whole lot about we have to quit the spending, because we don't have the right to put this debt on the next generation. That isn't true, because it's this generation, it's you right now. You're getting ready to get out of school, and you have debt, and the government has debt, and its obligations are endless. It's right now. We're all seeing the consequence of the last 50, 60, 70 years of excessive spending, deficit financing, mischief with the currency, and adapting. You know, I thought it would be so wonderful when the Cold War ended and we'd get a peace dividend. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. The neoconservatives took over, and they decided we had to be the policemen of the world. So to get back to where we were, we, of course, have to change our foreign policy. We have to look at the Federal Reserve, have a different monetary policy, and we have to further understand how free markets work. This whole idea, I know many people are motivated, and most of the people in Washington are well motivated to take care of people and don't let anybody fall through the cracks. But that's also the same motivation to run your personal life. They say, well, people aren't smart enough to know what they should do with their own habits, so we have to tell them and to regulate their lives. Then we also have to regulate how they spend their money. But they're well motivated because they think that the people won't take care of themselves. This is what motivated the housing bubble. You know, the Federal Reserve, easy credit, people can get a loan, saying this sounds wonderful. Everybody deserves to have a house. Everybody deserves to be free, but not everybody deserves a house at the expense of somebody else. You should have to work for it. But these easy credits seem to be helping. People were getting their houses, and then we had these government programs and forced banks to make bad loans. And they were wondering why this thing was coming about, because it was helping a lot of people. At the same time, they had this tremendous edge. The price of the house, the value of the house was going up and up. So you kept borrowing against this, and they refused. If you look at all the reports of both Greenspan and Bernanke, they never once said, they reassured everybody, oh, there's no problem at all, there's no housing bubble. But what happens? There was a lot of people making some big money on that. You know, we had Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the big banks, and a lot of people were making money. But this incentive to help poor people get a house, even though well-motivated, was a disaster, because guess what? The bubble burst, and the crisis hits, and people ran back to Washington. I remember in 2008, both presidential candidates ran back to vote for the bailouts, and guess who got bailed out? The very rich who were making all the money in the process, the ones who brought about the bankruptcy with the derivatives market, and they get the bailout. And what happened to the middle class? What happened to the people who were supposed to get houses? They lost their jobs and they lost their houses. So the entitlement system doesn't work. You should be entitled to your life, you should be entitled to your liberties, and you ought to be entitled to keep what you earn.
Yeah.
So often think that we've lost, as a people, we've lost our confidence in how the market works, and we've accepted a few notions that I think are completely wrong. One is that too many people accept the idea that the government can protect us against ourselves. You can't do that. I mean, you embark on the worst kind of government. It's the worst authoritarian government. And if you can't take care of yourself economically, then you have to have the nanny state taking care of us. But also, if you can't protect, if the government can protect you against yourself, that means they want to regulate every personal habit that you have. And it is true, when you have total freedom, some people are going to misuse that freedom. And sometimes they're going to do things that you're not going to like. But the whole thing is if you let the government make those decisions, when they make a mistake, they make them all for everybody. In a free society, you make a mistake, you make it for yourself, and you ought to suffer the consequences of your actions. understand that issue pretty well when it comes to religious beliefs. We can have no religious beliefs, or we can have various religions, and we tolerate that fairly well as intellectual activities. We're allowed to still read books about communism and socialism and all these failed policies, and we don't regulate that. But somewhere along the way, we've come up with this idea that we're allowed to regulate what goes into our souls and into our brains, but we're not allowed to regulate what goes into our body. I think in a free society, you ought to make your decision what goes into your body. This is a good idea, and I would even allow you to drink raw milk if you wanted to. The one thing that you're inheriting is a country that thinks they can solve all the problems. If you have a debt problem, you have more debt. If you have a spending problem, you spend more money. If you have a printing press problem, you print more money. But this whole thing, it just doesn't work that way. It makes things worse, and this is why we'll have to make these decisions rather quickly. But in the personal liberty issue, I think this is probably one of the most serious things because it seems to be ignored. After 9/11, which was a horrible day in our history, but I think because there has been a lot of misunderstanding exactly what happened, I don't happen to believe that we were attacked because we're free and prosperous. I don't think that's the case. But anyway, there were a lot of things on the books that they were trying to do. They had been itching to go to war against Iraq. It was their excuse to go to Iraq. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. They had no weapons of mass destruction. What other bill did they have floating around? They had been trying to pass it for years. It was called the Patriot Act. That passed rather easily because it was under the circumstances. I had one member of Congress tell me, well, I have to vote for it. And I said, you know what's in it? No, I don't know what's in it. And I said, there's going to be bad stuff in there. He said, yeah, I know that. He says, but how can I vote against the Patriot Act a couple days after 9/11?
That's fine, you all did.
He said, how am I going to go back home and explain that to my constituents? I said, that's your job. Go home and explain it. If they would have called that bill Repeal the Fourth Amendment Act, maybe they wouldn't have had so darn many votes for it. So when we get rid of the Patriot Act, we're going to call the bill Restore the Fourth Amendment. There's a lot more being going on. Not only has it been the Patriot Act, which means that the people who are wanting to search our houses and our internet and all can do it with the people doing the searching can write their own search warrants. You don't have to go to a judge anymore. But it's even gotten worse than that. The National Defense Authorization Act. This is literally saying that the military can come in now and arrest people and have no charges made, no attorney, and can be put in a secret prison indefinitely. That is not American. That's terrible. It has to be repealed.
Nullification.
The other day, Obama wrote an executive order. Well, we can do the principle of the executive order as well, too. But I've decided that as the president of constitutional president can repeal all the bad executive orders with another executive order. A Defense Production Act that's been on the books, and in time of war, the president can take over everything. The whole economy, can socialize the whole economy in the banking system and everything. But this time it was renewed by executive order just a couple weeks ago, and he added this thing, not in times of war, but he can do it in times